The Phoenix Police Department logged the missing person report at 8:36 p.m. on May 19, 2001. The caller was Angela Marquez, a 24-year-old medical student who had just finished her Saturday shift at a small clinic off McDowell Road. She told the dispatcher that her roommate, Rachel Porter, hadn't come home the night before, and that wasn't like her. Rachel was punctual, cautious, and always called when she'd be late. Angela's voice trembled through the line as she said, "Her car's still in the parking lot. Her phone's on the seat." The dispatcher sent a patrol unit. What they found in that parking lot would start one of the longest-running cold cases in Phoenix history. Rachel's car, a white 1998 Toyota Corolla, was parked neatly in a corner spot behind the clinic. The driver's door was locked. Through the window, officers could see her purse, wallet, and phone untouched. The car keys hung in the ignition. There were no signs of forced entry, no damage, no blood, and no print on a handle except her own. It looked as if she had stepped out for a moment and never come back. Rachel was last seen leaving work around 7:45 p.m. the previous night. Co-workers said she stayed late to finish paperwork. Security footage in the clinic's front door showed her exiting alone, wearing jeans, a gray hoodie, and carrying her backpack. She waved at someone off camera, then walked toward the lot. That was the last image anyone had of her alive. Investigators canvassed the area that night, knocking on doors, checking nearby businesses for surveillance. Back then, in 2001, cameras were grainy, unreliable, and most systems overwrote footage every few days. Still, one convenience store 2 blocks away captured something, a dark sedan idling at the corner around 7:50 p.m. It matched no employee's car. The tape was too blurry to identify a plate or model. By morning, the case had escalated. Friends and family flooded social media sites and print flyers with Rachel's photo, smiling, auburn hair tied back, bright eyes behind glasses. Her parents, Michael and Donna Porter, drove overnight from Tucson to Phoenix to meet detectives. They described their daughter as focused, responsible, and determined to finish med school. She'd never disappeared before, never skipped class, and wasn't seeing anyone serious at the time. The detectives listened, took notes, and promised to treat it as a priority. Within 48 hours, the search expanded. Volunteers combed through nearby desert scrublands and canals. Helicopters scanned the area using thermal imaging. Cadaver dogs searched drainage tunnels. Nothing, not a single footprint or discarded item. The case turned cold almost immediately. The lead investigator, Detective Ron Seaver, had worked homicide for 12 years. He'd seen domestic cases, robberies, abductions, but something about this one didn't fit. There was no motive, no witness, no trace. He told reporters she didn't run. Someone took her. By week 3, hope began to fade. The only evidence collected from Rachel's car were a few partial prints on the passenger door, none of them in the database. Forensics also found faint traces of sand inside the driver's floor mat. The particles were fine-grained and bright-colored, not from the city, but from the Sonoran Desert outside Phoenix. It suggested she'd driven, or been driven out there before she vanished. Detectives retraced every moment of Rachel's last day. She'd arrived at the clinic just before 11 a.m., clocked in, had lunch with Angela, and mentioned she'd be meeting someone that evening. When Angela asked who, Rachel said only an old friend. She didn't give a name. That single phrase, old friend, became the backbone of the case. Who was this person? And why did she never make it home? Investigators pulled Rachel's phone records, but in 2001, digital tracing was limited. The last call she made was at 7:32 p.m., 6 minutes before the footage showed her leaving the building. It lasted 23 seconds. The number was unlisted. When detectives tracked it down, it led to a prepaid phone purchased at a corner store in Tempe 2 days earlier. No buyer's name, no ID, no video of the transaction. A dead end. Summer came, then autumn, and the case faded from headlines. Rachel's family kept calling the department weekly, but every call ended the same way. No new leads. By December, Detective Seaver quietly transferred to the cold case unit, labeling it pending no suspect data. The years that followed were brutal for the Porters. Donna quit her job to volunteer at a missing persons network, refusing to accept her daughter was gone. Michael visited the clinic every year on the anniversary, standing by the parking spot where her car had been found. He said he could still feel her presence there, like time had frozen. Then, in 2006, a piece of evidence resurfaced that no one had paid much attention to the first time. The original crime scene photo showed something small and metallic wedged under Rachel's car. It had been listed in the report as unrelated debris, possibly a coin or washer from the pavement. But when a cold case technician re-examined the file, he noticed the shape was too uniform. He magnified the photo and realized it wasn't a coin. It was a key, a small silver padlock key. When the physical evidence locker was checked, the item was still there. It had been mislabeled and stored with Rachel's purse. No one had run it for prints or origin. When forensics finally did, they discovered a faint fingerprint pressed into the metal, one not belonging to Rachel. It was partial, but clean enough to catalog. Still, there were no matches in any national databases. Once again, the trail went cold. By 2010, the case file was buried under hundreds of others. Detective Seaver had retired. The Porter family had moved back to Tucson, carrying the weight of unanswered questions. Phoenix had grown, changed, modernized, but somewhere out there, a secret was still waiting in the dust. And then, after 10 years of silence, the city of Phoenix got its first new clue. A construction crew working along the Salt River discovered something strange, a half-buried metal lockbox, corroded and sealed shut. When they pried it open, they found inside an old leather wallet, a broken cell phone, and a student ID belonging to Rachel Porter. 10 years gone, and her story was about to resurface. The discovery of the lockbox in 2011 sent a jolt through the Phoenix Police Department. 10 years after Rachel Porter vanished, her name was suddenly back on every detective's desk. The evidence had survived a decade underground, sealed from the desert's heat and storms. Inside the corroded metal box, the contents were nearly fossilized. A cracked student ID card, a broken flip phone, a small leather wallet, and a single piece of paper folded tightly in half. The wallet still contained a few bills, a driver's license, and 2 faded photographs. One showed Rachel and her roommate Angela smiling at a cafe near campus. The other was a man no one recognized, mid-30s, clean-shaven, wearing sunglasses, standing in front of a mountain trailhead. On the back, in faint blue ink, were the words, Red Rock 2000. The folded paper was the strangest item of all. It was torn from a notebook and nearly illegible, the ink smeared by moisture and time. But a few words were clear enough to read. Friday night, 7:30, meet at the lot. Don't tell Angela. The handwriting matched Rachel's. When the evidence was logged and analyzed, forensics confirmed that the ink and paper dated back to around 2001. There was no doubt it was genuine. Detectives realized the note described her final night, and possibly the person she met before she vanished. The case was officially reopened. The new lead detective, Aaron Navarro, was part of Phoenix's modern cold case task force, specializing in DNA and digital reconstructions. She was young when Rachel disappeared, still in high school, but she'd grown up watching the story on the news. Now she was holding the evidence in her hands. She told her team, "This case has lived in silence for 10 years. Let's see what it wants to say now." The first thing Navarro did was re-examine the old phone. The model was obsolete, but its SIM card was intact. Data recovery technicians managed to extract fragments of the call log and one unsent text message from the night Rachel vanished. It was time-stamped 7:28 p.m. The message read, "Here now, where you parked." She never sent it. That text, paired with a note in the lockbox, painted a chilling timeline. Rachel had arrived at the clinic, finished work, written down her meeting reminder, and texted the person she was waiting for minutes before vanishing. The unanswered message was the last digital trace of her life. Navarro's next move was to identify the man in the photograph. She scanned it, enhanced the background, and recognized the trailhead. Red Rock Canyon, 3 hours north of Phoenix, near Sedona. The region was a popular hiking spot in the late 1990s and early 2000s. Detectives began combing through archived visitor permits from that year. Back then, hikers were required to sign paper logs at the trail entrance. The 2000 logbook was still preserved in a storage box maintained by the local ranger's office. When Navarro's team found the page with the date stamped on the back of the photo, 2 names appeared, written in pencil. R. Porter, and below it, T. Holbrook. That was the first time anyone had ever seen that name connected to Rachel's life. Cross-referencing public records revealed that Thomas Holbrook had been a lab technician at the same university where Rachel was studying. He was 33 at the time she vanished, a decade older than her. He left Phoenix in 2002, moving first to Nevada, then to Colorado, where he opened a small mechanical repair business. He'd never been a suspect because his name had never come up before. There were no witness statements, no interviews, no connections. Until now, Detective Navarro contacted the university archives. They confirmed Holbrook had worked in the campus biochemistry department during the spring and summer of 2000. The same semester Rachel had been assigned to a research internship. There was no record of any disciplinary issues or personal complaints, but coworkers remembered him as withdrawn, meticulous, and private. When shown the photo, 2 former faculty members identified him instantly. One said, "That's Holbrook. He used to take the students hiking up north," said it cleared his head. Navarro immediately ordered a background check. Holbrook had no criminal record, no arrests, no violent history. But his address history showed something odd. In 2001, he'd rented an apartment just 3 blocks from Rachel's clinic. He moved out the same week she disappeared. That was the break the case needed. The Phoenix police issued a subpoena for Holbrook's old employment and rental records. They found that his lease was terminated suddenly. He'd paid the remainder of his rent in cash and left no forwarding address. Neighbors at the time told officers they remember a man leaving one night in a hurry, loading boxes into a dark-colored sedan. When asked about the date, one neighbor said, "Around May, early summer. I remember because it was the same week they found that missing girl's car on the news." Detective Navarro traveled to Colorado to question him. By then, Holbrook was 43 years old, running a quiet auto repair shop outside Fort Collins. When she introduced herself, he didn't act surprised. He said, "You're here about Rachel." She asked him how he knew. He smiled faintly and said, "I figured someone would come eventually." The interview lasted 3 hours. Holbrook admitted knowing Rachel, but claimed it was strictly professional. He said they'd worked together on a university research project and occasionally met for coffee. He denied any romantic involvement, denied ever meeting her the night she vanished, and denied writing the note found in the lockbox. But as the conversation went on, Navarro noticed something unsettling. He knew details that had never been released publicly. He referred to the clinic parking lot, even though reports had always called it the lot behind the medical building. He also mentioned the exact time she left work, 7:45 p.m. That timestamp had never been disclosed. When Navarro asked how he knew that, he said, "You must have told me." She hadn't. That was enough to get a warrant. The Colorado Bureau of Investigation assisted with a full forensic sweep of Holbrook's property. Inside his workshop, officers found a small safe hidden beneath the floorboards. Inside were dozens of personal mementos, photos, old ID cards, jewelry, and pieces of paper labeled with initials. One of them read, RP. Next to it was a silver padlock key. It was identical to the one found beneath Rachel's car. The Arizona forensic team matched the 2 pieces immediately. The grooves aligned perfectly. The lockbox that had been buried under the riverbank for a decade had been sealed with the padlock that key opened. That discovery connected Holbrook directly to the disposal of Rachel's belongings, but it didn't explain how she died. No body had ever been found. No physical evidence tied him to a murder. Navarro needed one more piece, something to close the loop completely. She went back to the recovered wallet. The student ID had been tested years earlier for fingerprints, but now technology had advanced. Touch DNA analysis could extract trace skin cells from plastic surfaces invisible to the eye. When the lab ran the new test, the result came back within 48 hours. The DNA on the back of the ID didn't belong to Rachel. It belonged to Thomas Holbrook. The chances of random transfer after 10 years buried underground were nearly zero. He had handled her ID, her wallet, and sealed them inside the box himself. The case that had haunted Phoenix for a decade was finally moving again. On July 22, 2011, Phoenix police and the Colorado Bureau executed a coordinated arrest. Holbrook was taken into custody at his shop without incident. He didn't resist. He didn't deny. He simply said, "I wonder how long it would take." When asked why he kept a lockbox buried all those years, he replied, "Because she wanted to be found." His words sent chills through every investigator in the room. The arrest made national headlines. For the first time in 10 years, the city that had once plastered Rachel's face across telephone poles finally had a name, a suspect, and a confession, at least par one. But what came next? The trial, the testimony, and what Holbrook admitted inside that courtroom would shake the community to its core. Because the truth wasn't just about Rachel's disappearance. It was about what else he'd been hiding. The trial of Thomas Holbrook began in early 2012, nearly 11 years after Rachel Porter vanished from that parking lot behind the clinic. By then, the case had already divided the city. For months, Phoenix had lived inside the echo of her name again. Old headlines revived, photographs reprinted, radio hosts replaying the story as if time had rewound. Every detail was dissected. The quiet technician who no one remembered had become the face of a nightmare that haunted an entire generation. Holbrook's defense claimed the evidence was circumstantial. A lockbox, a key, and a DNA trace that could have transferred years before the crime. But the prosecution built a timeline that left no doubt. They showed jurors the note found in the box, the unsent text message, and the trail that led straight from Rachel's phone to Holbrook's prepaid number. They displayed the old Red Rock Canyon photo, establishing that the two knew each other long before Rachel disappeared. They played clips from Holbrook's interrogation, where he stumbled through questions he should never have known the answers to. The courtroom fell silent as Detective Navarro described the moment she found a matching padlock key hidden in his safe. She said, "It wasn't luck. It was him keeping a memory no one was supposed to find." For weeks, the trial followed the rhythm of a slow storm. Quiet testimony, long silences, flashes of pain from Rachel's family sitting in the front row. Donna Porter never looked away from the man who had taken her daughter. Michael sat beside her, hands clasped tight, holding the same photo he'd carried to the station the night she vanished. Then, on the 12th day, the prosecution called its final witness, a forensic pathologist. Her testimony changed everything. When investigators recovered Rachel's belongings from the lockbox, they had also preserved small soil samples from inside. The lab had analyzed those samples and found something that at first seemed irrelevant: trace amounts of calcium phosphate mixed with silica and iron oxide. The combination was unusual. It wasn't typical desert dust. It was crushed limestone, the kind used in construction around drainage canals built during the early 2000s near the outskirts of the city. There was only one project using that material in May of 2001, the expansion of the Salt River retention basins, and Holbrook's old apartment sat less than a mile from that construction site. When police searched that area again in late 2011, they discovered something half buried in a section of an unused canal, a cluster of concrete fragments with embedded cloth fibers and bone residue. DNA confirmed the remains belonged to Rachel Porter. After a decade of uncertainty, she had been found. The courtroom sat in absolute stillness as the prosecutor described how Holbrook had likely buried her in construction site, using the fresh concrete to conceal her remains before fleeing the state. The sand found in her car matched the same mineral composition. The crushed limestone on the site was identical to the residue in the lockbox. Every loose end had found its thread. When Holbrook was asked to explain the evidence, he said nothing. He sat perfectly still, eyes fixed forward, his expression unreadable. Only when the prosecutor asked him why he kept Rachel's belongings did he finally speak. He said, "I didn't want her to disappear completely." The word struck the room like a blow. Donna Porter stood up and left in tears. The judge paused the session for 10 minutes to allow the jury to recover from the emotional shock. Outside the courthouse, people gathered holding candles and photos of Rachel. They weren't protesting. They were remembering. For 11 years, she had been a symbol of every missing girl in the state. Every case that ended without answers. Now there was closure, but no peace. In March 2012, the jury found Thomas Holbrook guilty of first-degree murder, kidnapping, and evidence tampering. He was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. He showed no emotion as the sentence was read. When the judge asked if he had anything to say to the family, he simply replied, "I thought she would leave with me. I was wrong." No one fully understood what he meant, but detectives believe it referred to his relationship with Rachel, that he had tried to rekindle an old connection she no longer wanted. She had agreed to meet him that night to end things finally, and when she refused to go with him, he snapped. The details of the killing were never fully revealed. Holbrook never confessed to how it happened, only that he lost control. But investigators pieced together a probable chain of events. Rachel left the clinic, walked toward her car, and met him near the parking lot. Something went wrong, an argument, perhaps. He restrained her, took her to his apartment, and by the next day, she was gone. He buried her body in a newly poured canal structure and fled Phoenix before construction resumed. Weeks later, he buried her belongings miles away under the riverbank, hoping they'd never surface. But they did, and so did he. Detective Navarro later said in an interview, "What solved this case wasn't luck. It was patience. The evidence never forgot where it was buried. We just had to listen long enough to find it." In the months after the verdict, the city of Phoenix saw something rare. Public donations poured into the state's cold case unit. Volunteers joined missing persons organizations. For the first time, old files that had gathered dust for years were reopened. Rachel's case had become a turning point. Proof that silence doesn't always mean the story is over. Her parents established the Rachel Porter Foundation, dedicated to helping families of the missing. Their first mission was to install better lighting and surveillance in clinic parking lots across Maricopa County. Her father said, "You can't bring her back, but maybe you can stop someone else's story from starting like this." On the 10-year anniversary of her disappearance, people gathered at the riverbank where her lockbox had been found. They placed flowers in the water and released white lanterns into the evening sky. The light drifted over the city, reflecting against the surface of the river. Calm, endless, forgiving. For a few moments, everything was quiet. Then the wind picked up, and one of the lanterns lifted higher than the rest, rising alone until it disappeared into the night. Detective Navarro stood with the Porters and said softly, "That's her." Donna nodded and whispered, "She finally made it home." The story of the Phoenix 2001 cold case became more than a murder investigation. It became a lesson about time, persistence, and the power of unfinished stories. Because the truth doesn't always reveal itself in days or months. Sometimes it takes years, a decade of silence, a forgotten key, a single photograph left behind. But eventually, the past speaks. And when it does, it doesn't whisper. It echoes. Today, Rachel's name is engraved on a memorial near the Salt River, alongside dozens of others whose stories are still waiting to be solved. Every year, the local police department lights a candle for her in their lobby. Beside it sits the same photograph recovered from the lockbox. Her smile frozen in time, her eyes calm, her life suspended between two worlds. The one she left and the one that finally found her. The case of Rachel Porter is officially closed. But her story, the way it unraveled, the way it forced the city to look at itself, still lingers like heat in the desert air. Because the truth never really disappears. It just waits to be found. And sometimes all it takes is one buried lockbox, one forgotten key, and one detective who refuses to stop listening to the silence.